Hello and welcome to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong. And today I am here with one of the nicest, smartest guys that I know, Jim Dickie, who is currently a research fellow at Sales Mastery. He's a sales transformation analyst. If you don't know Jim and you want a stat about selling, Jim's the guy. And he'll have a story to go along with each one of those stats as well. He was also the former co-founder of CSO Insights. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be here.
So today we're talking about the evolution of sales methodology, and we're introducing the first AI native sales execution methodology, which is a Close Strong product. So you and I, Jim, we've spent a great deal of time chatting about evolution of selling and the need to evolve how we enable salespeople. And today we're going to dive deep into sales methodology and what we're bringing to market to deliver a solution that matches the reality of today's market. So here's my first question for you. I'm looking at it. It's a rather long one. So American companies spend $26 billion a year sales methodology training events. I've interviewed 65 sales revenue and enablement leads as I was building out this solution. All of them had made that investment. They pulled that lever of sales methodology training, and all of them, to a person, were not pleased. And this blew me away. I put this up on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. All of them said, look, we're not qualifying. We're not multi-threading. We're not doing a good job of competitive insight. We're doing crap discovery, and we're not selling solutions. We're reacting to customers and order fulfilling. So why, with all this money and all this time going into training for how to do those things, to a person, all 65 of these execs said, we're failing the basics still?
Well, I think, Brent, let's even start off by just focusing on the fact that we've been spending billions of dollars on not just training. We've been spending it on CRM. We've been spending it on content. We're spending it on a whole lot of things for salespeople. And you mentioned that we've been doing a longitudinal study on sales for over 30 years. And let me just share with you one stat. So, of the 70 metrics we gather, one of the things we always say is, what's the outcome of forecast deals? So this is forecast. This is not all the deals that go in the pipeline. These are the ones that you're at the end of the shoot. You sit there and say, hey, this is going to close in the next 30, 60, 90 days, whatever your forecast horizon is. What's the outcome?
Yeah.
And the outcome has never been over 50% in all the years we've done this. Now, this is a forecast, by the way, that we created.
Yes.
And the odds of winning at the craps tables of Vegas are 49.3%. And so we're doing like worse than playing craps.
So flip a coin.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that people need to understand is this can't continue. Something's fundamentally wrong. And I think one of the things that's wrong is the way that we've been approaching sales is, we'll have the sales kickoff meeting. We'll plan some training events for that. We'll bring everybody together. We roll out and say, okay, here's what we want you to do. So we want you to call high. We want you to differentiate. We want you to create a sense of urgency. We want you to sell value and avoid discounting. And you go, great. But then, the reps leave there and say, okay, I now know what to do. Well, I probably already knew what to do when I got to the sales kickoff meeting. But then we get back and they come back and they say, okay, how do I do that? And the how is left up to the sales manager.
Yes.
Because they're supposed to go in and coach.
Yeah.
And that's great. But when we've asked, again, sales managers, how do you spend your time? They come back and they say, well, I spend about 20% of my time coaching. Well, if I've got 8 direct reports, an hour per week per person. And by the way, half of that's probably just saying, what's the status on the GE deal? And so they're just reiterating stuff that's probably already in CRM. That's not coaching.
No, it's auditing.
That's talking.
Yeah.
So, there's just really not this model. The model's kind of broken, is that we come up with what to do, but we're not really dealing with the how of selling, and the how changes all the time. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that companies need to deal with.
Yep. And another thing, Jim, that you and I have talked about is when we talk about sort of traditional, or what I would call legacy methodology, the 2-day events that you roll out. you and I had a discussion the other day about we need to think about that definition of methodology in a more broad way, right? Most of us think it's the IP, right? It's the content that you get in the workshop. That's the methodology, but it's really broader than that. What's your take on when we think about methodology? What are all the stages of it?
I think that really there are six things that kind of strike us that need to be part of an overall sales methodology. One is the intellectual property itself. There are a lot of good basic frameworks for how to
Yeah.
go out and sell that are out there that have been proven, and I think they still hold the test of time. But the key thing on it is we don't live in a one size fits all world. And so we've got to take that methodology and we've got to first off customize it to our company.
Yes.
Because when you sit there and say, well, I want you to go out and differentiate yourself in the marketplace, well, what's my differentiation? For one company, it could be their product. For another company, it could be their service. For a third company, it could be their price.
Yeah.
For a fourth company, it could be their alliances with other partners. I mean, so you've got to come in and customize this thing to each individual company. And so somebody's got to do that work. Then there's the delivery mechanism. We've for years relied on training salespeople. So again, okay, let's bring in everybody to the sales kickoff meeting, and for 3 days, we're going to go through training courses on this new stuff. Well, there's been tons of studies published that just said, classroom training is great as long as you immediately go out and start to apply what you learned. Because if you don't apply it immediately, you fall off in terms of retention of what the skills and tactics that you were given. So I think we've got to deal with that. Then we've got to sit there and say, okay, how do we apply this methodology to this specific deal?
Yes.
Because there's a sell cycle involved, but the sell cycle is there for one reason. It's there to support the buy cycle. And each customer is going to be buying different ways. So I've got to then customize the application of this thing to this unique customer. And so therefore I'm again going back to what we already talked about, coaching and having my sales manager or something or somebody, come in and kind of help me modify this thing and go through and saying, are we doing the right thing? Is it working? And then the last thing is we live in a frail ecosystem. So the way that we were selling last week may not work this week. So how do we constantly adapt how we're selling? So I think, there are six aspects and we're just focused on one. Hey, we delivered a methodology.
Yeah.
We had a class. And
That
that's part of
yeah.
it, but it's definitely not all. I think that's why things are failing.
Yeah, that I love that definition because I do think that most of us think it's the IP. And again, the IP is not bad, and the IP is actually not the problem. It's all the customization and the pull through. When you mentioned customization, I realize in the last year as we're rolling out this new solution that we think of customization in terms of scopes. What is the rep selling? Who are they competing against? What vertical are they in? And is it a new or renewal? Most of the customers we're working with now have 20 scopes. And if you go back to the legacy approach to methodology, it's and we're going to talk about how we use AI to do that today. But with legacy methodology, what I see and what I did in my past methodology company is we had to do kind of the one size fits all. It wasn't dialed into what am I selling, who am I competing against, is it new or renewal? That like how do you sell in that situation? And I think many of these methodologies you and I discussed the other day that it's been 20 years maybe since a new methodology, a brand new methodology has come out, and they were all built in a time where the world was different and the technology that exists today wasn't there, right? So all those six steps you talk about to me reflect what was happening 20 years ago.
Exactly. And the world is changing dramatically and AI is driving that change.
Yeah, the other thing you talked about was applying it to the deal. And I not only ran a methodology company, I was also an independent consultant for another methodology company. And what that meant was you fill in the form at the end of the training class, right? There's a skill acquisition piece
Yes.
for a day and a half, and then you fill in the blank form, which to me, it's the answers that go into the form is where the brilliance is, and the reps are zero basing every deal based on that. And again, that's something that's existed forever. There's not been an alternative to the typical sales training events. I think that's why people still pull the lever. They get a little lift out of it, but but the design is just old. And then you also mentioned the static nature of them too. The world's changing quickly. It sounds cliche, but how do you update that? So I have another question for you. I've noticed lately that a lot of the legacy methodology companies are kind of trying to retrofit. They're trying to bring in AI, right? So they're trying to retrofit with some third party AI. What do you see as, is that the right solution? Are there problems with that?
I think there are because everybody talks about AI, but I actually managed my first AI projects in the '80s,
Yes.
and I was using algorithms from the '50s, which, by the way, are still valid.
Yeah.
But we were at that point in time just kind of scratching the surface on what could you do with this. I remember speaking to Comdex. I did a presentation on what is artificial intelligence and why should I care. And I think we're still struggling today that, when you take a look at Chat GPT and you say, here's a powerful, powerful tool,
Yeah.
game changer in all marketplaces. What's the most common thing people are using it for? Proofreading and editing documents.
Right.
Come on. So
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem right now is you've got methodology companies who are not technologists, and you really have got to blend the two together to really understand, because otherwise you're going to be driving a Ferrari down the Autobahn in Germany at 30 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And that's not what it was made for. You're
Yeah.
supposed to be driving at 150 miles an hour.
Absolutely. And that's why when I talk about that we are the first AI native built methodology, and we call it a sales execution methodology. That it's not a bolt on. It's not something for a methodology that was developed in the '80s. It's like it's purpose built. In fact, we can't execute ours without using AI, right? Because it's purpose built. But I know you had some questions for me about that, so I'm gonna throw it back to you at this point.
Well, before we get into what you were just starting to talk about, I co-founded two software companies in my life, and Arthur Rock, who was one of the lead, visionaries in the venture capital space, was an investor in one of those. Arthur was the first investor in Intel, was an early investor in Apple, and he was really great at asking really probing questions. And one question he would always ask is he'd sit down and when I'd say, "Hey, I got an idea for a new software company," he'd go, "Great, what's your motivation?"
Right.
What's your motivation for solving this specific problem? Why is this problem we're solving? And why is your approach the unique way that you want to do it? So I'm going to ask you, what's your motivation for
Yeah.
trying to take a look at, building a first native sales application methodology around precision guided selling?
So some of our listeners know that I ran and still have Think Inc., which is a negotiation methodology company, right? And customers still love it and buy it, but there's a better way. And one of the reasons I've realized there's a better way is that one of our customers asked us to coach $1 billion in renewals in the pipe. And we've been rolling out workshops all over the world for this Fortune 10 company, and we coach these $1 billion in deals, and I just realized, wow, like this had major league impact. Jim and Brian working on a $5 million renewal for 2 or 3 Zoom sessions or even some in-person sessions. That was brutal to scale, way more effective than running the workshops. Brutal to scale. I think we were billing that at 10K a day. So we were touching the top 1% of the sales force and the top 5% of the deals. And so part of my motivation was there has got to be a better way to completely redefine methodology and sales training. And so that was one of my goals, was how do we scale? How do we completely redefine this from events of 20 people sitting in a room to one-to-one 24/7 365 at scale for about the same price as training events? And so that was one push. And you you had mentioned to me, I don't know, about a year ago, we were talking about something, and I will talk a lot about strategy to tactics connection. I believe that sales training should be about how do you execute your strategy one deal at a time, not how do you sell, which is kind of generic methodology. And you mentioned something to me. A company comes up with a new initiative, a new product, they announce it at SKO, and then on Monday everybody goes back and sells the same thing, and the customers are still ordering the same thing. And it struck me, that was at least a couple of years ago you said that to me, and that was a motivation too. It's like, how do we get that behavior change at the deal level at each stage of the sales cycle? If we're trying to make a switch to sell something new, How do we do that, right? So now I'll give you a quick example. I know folks in me, I like examples. We were working with a telecom company that was primarily a contract manufacturer, and they wanted to move upstream into both integrated design and manufacturing solutions. So they did what you said. They announced it at SKO, and people went back, and customers were still ordering contract manufacturing from them because that's what they knew. Sellers were still selling it because that was their comfort zone. And the question is, how do you drill that strategy, whether it's new or existing? How should we be qualifying to sell this new solution? Who should we be talking to? What new KPIs can we impact? What kind of discovery should we be doing? What does our competitive analysis look like with this new solution in here? How should we be configuring solutions and presenting them to customers? That's what you said to me 2 years ago, but we need to get into the how. That's what AI native sales execution methodology is all about, is to say, what is your strategy and how does it, we call it, actually you helped with this name, precision guided selling. Precision at each sales stage. What do we have to be doing differently? What data do we need to execute this part of our strategy?
Let's get into just a little bit more, Brian, because you've talked about that. But when you get into what do you mean by AI native sales execution methodology? What does that mean to you, and what should other sales executives be thinking about?
Yeah, well, native, I kind of touched on quickly earlier. Ours is purpose built. We've got some methodology. We've got a book that supports it, but the book is only given to our clients because it's useless out there in the field, because the book is supported by AI. Right? So it was purpose built. Like, this whole thing was purpose built together to encompass all what you talked about before. What's the underlying methodology? How are we going to customize it? How are we going to deliver it? How are we going to coach it and reinforce it? And how are we going to update it? It was built ground up, leveraging current technology. So, so that's AI native. When we talk about sales execution, again, it's back to that how are we executing our sales? That's what we should be teaching reps how to do. And it's cool because I think one of the things I wrote in the Precision Guided Selling book is, hey, you as a rep, your job now is executing company strategy one deal at a time. I think that's a pretty cool job, right? And that's what AI native sales execution methodology is all about, is as your strategy is shifting, as the marketplace is changing, are we feeding this at each stage of a deal to a rep? Are we giving them the data and the insight and the guidance that they need to compete? So the AI guides reps. There's essentially sort of no training with this approach. It goes immediately to deal application, right? Say, okay, welcome, log in. Let's go to this opportunity. Let's qualify, right? And let's continue to go through this. And it's available, 24/7, 365. And the question I've been talking to some potential customers about is, look, you can spend $1,500 a head, 150 grand on rolling out 2-day events, or you can have 24/7 365 support for every rep on every sales stage for the next year for about the same investment. And so that to me, that's the starkest way, Jim, to think about the difference between rolling out legacy events and having this sustained, scalable solution that's one-to-one and completely in context.
Brian, you had asked me to talk about what I thought the components ought to be for successful implementations of projects. I came up with 6 things for you. Let's go back and revisit how you stack up against those things, because you've talked about the fact you've got a methodology, but where did it come from?
Right.
What kind of testing has it been under over the last couple decades that you've been rolling it out?
We've had for others who work in startups, and Jim, this should sound familiar to you. We have had an argument here for a year about whether or not we are a methodology. And quite frankly, my team, and I think even you to a degree, were saying yes, you are. And I was the one pushing back. And I finally realized we are. So we've prior to founding this company for 20 years, we coach deals in 47 countries, and we know what a fact-based approach for at each stage of the deal cycle, from qualify to close. What data do we need to continue to nudge this deal forward and include and increase our close rate? So it's really our methodology, if you want to call it that, is process steps. At what stages, what data and insight do we need to compete, and how are we going to use that with this customer, and is it connected to our overall strategy? And so the precision guided selling, it is a methodology that encompasses all those moving parts you talked about, and it can be used as a standalone, or if somebody else is using a classic methodology, and their team is licensed to use it, our guidance can even reinforce that and pull it through.
Got it. So I understand that, but what is your approach in terms? How are you different in terms of customizing that methodology to each individual customer that you're going to be working with going forward?
Yep. To me, this is one of the most exciting parts, and it's one of the breakthroughs that we had. I had mentioned earlier that part of the trick with customizations is scope. A rep's working on this solution against this competitor in this vertical, and it's either new or renewal. There's almost no way to customize methodology and then deliver that to people in a classroom to give them the guidance they need on the how. And we had a dream. There's two parts to our solution. One is the strategy center, which is the brain of the guide, and then the second is the close plan, which is where the brain speaks to the rep and guides them. We had a dream 18 months ago that the strategy center would create itself. I could say I'm my client at Close Strong is GE Healthcare, and I could put that into the brain, and the brain would build out data that tracks with every stage of the sales cycle. We were doing that manually. It took us about 6 weeks. We build about 20,000 for the average customer to build out one or two scopes. The AI can now build out 20, 30 scopes in 15, 20 minutes. And so that's one way in which it's different. It's the level of customization, multiple scopes. We just did this for one of our first clients, and we ran, excuse me, we ran the data by 4 cross-functional execs, deal desk people, product people, sales leads, and they rated the data 87% accurate before we ever spoke to a human, right?
Wow.
To get it done. And then what we did is we interviewed some of those key execs, like the deal desk and product and pricing and sales lead, and talked to them about their frustrations. What's wrong? What's coming in? Why are these deals in bad shape? What would make them be in better shape? We record those interviews, have AI summarize it, and then drop that into the prompt for their guide. And this is, again, to me, the most exciting part of what we do. And we started out building this close plan thing, and then the tail wagged the dog, and the strategy center took on a life of its own. So it's already laden with prompts, really good prompts. But now I interviewed Jim Dickie, who's the deal desk guy at this company. You tell me what your frustrations are, what you want to see more of, less of, same of. I summarize that. I drop it into the prompt for your unique instance. So when a rep's getting around to the business of configuring solution in commercial terms, it's being guided how Jim Dickie would guide them. And we demoed this. We interviewed this customer, and we started with our AI data. Then we interviewed the customer. He dropped in the prompt, and we had the guide produce a solution in commercial terms configuration. And it was so cool. This exec said, "You just scaled the hell out of me." Right? Yes. Everything I want reps doing, and a lot of the things that are not happening are now happening. And you know what? You want to change that tomorrow? It's no problem. I'm going to interview you. I'm going to summarize it. I'm going to drop it into the prompt. So I hope we did the same with the one lead who was really high on discovery. It's like, who should we be talking to? What should we be talking to them about? This is a company that is in manufacturing business, and there's a lot of engineering data. And he gave us, we should be talking to these production managers about these specific engineering specs. And all that went into the prompt. So when the guide is bringing discovery questions back to the rep, it's reflecting, right? When you're talking to this person, you've got to get to this KPI. So I hope that helps. I mean, it's completely different than the sort of soft approach to light overarching customization, and it's drilled down precisely to what am I selling, who am I competing against, what vertical, et cetera.
You take a look at AI and you see clearly this could be a profound aid to help salespeople in terms of giving that 7x24 coaching type of capability. But I'm just kind of curious: how is your delivery of this solution going to be different than sitting there and saying we're going to it's a kickoff meeting, we're going to cover everything? This is like, it sounds like this could be delivered every single day on every single deal. So what's that look like to you?
Yeah, I'd mentioned earlier that it's like, as we've completely tried to redefine this whole notion of sales training and think of sales methodology at the base of this, that we bypassed the skill acquisition phase. We go directly Okay. The rep is going to do about 2.5 hours of online modules to get a sense of what this methodology is. What is PGS, precision guided selling, based on? How does the technology work? Get them ready. But that's more of a kind of a soft intro. The moment they log in, they are asked, "What are you selling? Who are you competing against? What vertical are you selling in? Is it new or renewal?" And then all the data in the strategy center pulls into the guide's brain for that deal, and we start with qualify, right? To go, okay, here's what this is the part I'd mentioned. A lot of methodology, you're filling out blank forms. It's the answers that go into the forms that are helpful. The rep is not taught how to qualify. It's saying, okay, for this kind of a deal, here are the 6 qualifiers, and those are weighted kind of most to least important. And you shouldn't even go after this thing. It'll give them a score, but based on actual qualification criteria, then it will kind of de-risk the deal. It'll look at, is it qualified? Am I talking to the right people about the right things? Can I compete? And based on what the rep's clicking and the answers they're giving to the data we're providing them, it's giving them kind of a risk score for this deal. And then giving them the specific actions against specific stakeholders down to the specific discovery that they need to be doing to de-risk this deal and raise the probability of winning.
Gotcha. And I guess the thing is, let's take it a step further and talk about, how do the reps then apply it to each individual deal? Is it going
Yep.
through and saying, okay, as we're progressing on this thing, I'm giving it some feedback, but it's giving me more advice all the way through the process? How's that work?
Yeah, and I kind of started bleeding into some of that in my previous answer, but it's 24/7 on demand, just in time versus just in case, and again 365. It's there. This isn't a 2-day event, and we hope the coaches pull it through. The coaching's built into it. Frontline coaches are given deal summaries for every deal that's being guided, right? So we can help them, and I think we'll talk about that later. But yeah, what happens with the rep is, again, they come in, they log in, they click a few boxes saying this is what I'm selling, who I'm competing against, etc. And it starts from qualify to stakeholder engagement to our ability to compete to then discovery questions and an action plan, and then coming back for solution configuration, and then finally developing customer facing solutions. And at each phase, I mean, some of these steps are taking 3 to 4 minutes because the data is being provided to the rep. They're not filling out forms. They're just clicking what's relevant. So it's real time. It's immediate. It's just in time. And it's giving them data that's in alignment with the company strategy, right? Aligned with every sales stage. So I hope that helps. It's a little bit different than spending 2 days in a class and spending most of your time doing skill acquisition and then filling out the form at the end of the class. We start immediately. The training is immediately, let's qualify this opportunity based on these qualifiers that are custom for what you're selling.
So when you're getting into the coaching type of model, the technology AI, it can be a coach by itself, but you're also going to have your own sales manager as a coach. What's that blended coaching model look like?
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine, Gary, who's a sales VP at a tech company, and I showed him the deal summary. So after the rep is guided, a deal summary is provided to the frontline manager, a 1-pager. And Gary said, "Holy blank, I could 3 to 5x the quality and quantity of my one-on-ones." And I think I knew the answer, but I was like, "Tell me some more on that." And he said, "I spend, excuse me, I spend half of my one-on-one downloading the basic data on the deal. And you're handing me, is it qualified? Who am I talking to? Where are my holes? Have I done discovery? Am I ready to compete? All that, you're dropping all that in front of me." And his point was, I can do a lot more and I can do a lot better because I can start deep. I'm starting at, who knows, 20 or 30 feet underground versus 10 feet above ground, saying, okay, let's begin with the basics. So, and I think that's the big piece, is that we're doing a lot of that guiding up front. We know managers are not going to have time to do it. Now, there are some deals that need to be double clicked on, and that's why we have a deal summary. If we know, and Jim, I think you've told me this, that 5% of a pipeline is being touched by a frontline sales manager today. You don't want every deal guided. If this is your new sales training solution, You want people to be doing, maybe if the what would happen if you had 50 to 60% of the pipe guided by the AI, and then the top 10% of that push the deal summary to the frontline manager, who then double coaches it. And so that's kind of the model. And we've even got to onboard the managers to say, how do you coach a deal that's been pre-coached or pre-guided in this way, because it's, all the basics are covered for you, so you can now begin to get like crazy deep.
I think, one of the things we've seen in the past is that when you're trying to improve something over time, we've been relying on people to do that. So we've been relying on managers to improve the sales process. We've been relying on programmers to improve the CRM technology. AI can help improve itself.
Yes.
So, how is precision guided selling reacting to what it learns in terms of, hey, we provided this guidance, except this new little twist came up in the marketplace, and here's the more effective way to handle it next time. How does that evolve itself, and what does that mean to the rep and to the manager?
So you make me think of something. We were presenting to a potential investor who asked, "Well, you're training an LLM, so how long before this thing has efficacy? How long before it learns enough to be really smart?" And we said it's going to have efficacy on day one because it's got the company strategy in its brain for any configuration of solution and competitor types you want to put in there. But it will then learn over time. And we're at the point right now where if a company has a strategy shift, we're going to interview that exec and we're going to drop it into the prompt. We're working on the tech right now for it to scan, for the strategy center to scan and say, your competitor just introduced a new piece of software, and that should change the way we do competitive analysis, right? So that's phase two. But right now we can adjust pretty easily with shifts in customer strategy or market changes, and just shift the brain of the guide a little bit, so we get it to react real time. I was speaking with an SVP at a supply chain management company who bought one of their biggest competitors in Europe. And there's only two or three players in this space. And he was saying, this is great because we had a much smaller footprint than our closest competitor in Europe, so that therefore gave us a much smaller global footprint. And we lost a lot of deals. And I said, okay, so you just acquired this company. How long before words are coming out of reps' mouths to execute? Again, how do you qualify now that you've got an expanded footprint? Does that change the stakeholders you're talking to? With KPIs you can impact, how you configure solutions, how you compete against these other two? He said 9 to 12 months. By the time marketing, and this, you're nodding, it's like by the time marketing comes up with the decks and the talk tracks, and then how much are people actually going to use it? In a scenario like that, I would say 48 hours, we could blend in how we should be selling across the entire sales process from qualify to close, given this change in our value proposition.
You're suggesting a lot of change here, and so I guess my last question for you, Brian, is this: there's evolutionary change and there's revolutionary change. And so, companies have already invested in ways to sell. And so, if they've already got a methodology, are you going to be a revolutionary thing that requires a lot of shakeup, or is it evolutionary, or is it kind of a combination of the two?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and again, one of those arguments we've had internally, right? A lot of discussion about it, and the reality is that some of our customers are using my methodology from Think Inc. Right. So our guide, when it comes to negotiation phase, our guide already has that information in its brain in the strategy center. So it will guide the rep according to those principles because the customer bought that training and they like it. And so in essence, we're pulling it through. And that can be done for any upfront methodology. Again, the methodologies themselves aren't bad. The problem is they're not being pulled through. So anybody who's licensed, any rep who's licensed to use XYZ methodology, the guide can reinforce and use that language and help pull it through for our customers. I think PGS can stand alone by itself, but for folks who have made investments in some selling methodology and are struggling with pulling it through, we can add in all this custom contextualized data and pull that through at the same time.
Well, it's interesting because I think we've seen that what we've been doing the last 20, 30 years isn't generating the results we want, we're clearly going to have to be doing something different. So it'll be interesting to see how the market reacts to this, because I think what you're talking about is what we need. Is we need to have a fundamental different way of moving away from sales reps focusing on transactions, things that are rapid, repetitive, routine, to interactions, which are complex, protracted, value add. And we're going to have to support that a totally different way.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying that I think the decision for a lot of sales enablement leads and a lot of CROs and sales leads is which methodology should I choose, right? And that's been the choice that's out there. I'm going to pull the sales training lever. My choice is which methodology. What we're bringing to market is you have an entirely different way now, an entirely different level, but within that sales training that again it customizes differently, it delivers differently, it coaches differently. It'll pull through your earlier investments, and this is where we're hoping this is a revolutionary approach to say it's a new way to think about training your salespeople. And you have that choice of 2-day events, or you have that notion of 365 24/7, or every rep, every deal for almost precisely the same investment. And the question is which one's going to yield more, and for me that answer is easy.
Agree with you.
All right. So, Jim, I really appreciate you doing this. And I appreciate, for those who are listening, Jim and I have been talking about this subject for years. And, we've just launched our MVP for both the Strategy Center and the Rep Facing Close Plan. And it's come to fruition after a lot of years of dialogue. So, Jim, I appreciate not only your time today, but your support over the years to kind of rethink what's broken, and how do we bring something that's much more effective to market. So, thank you.
My pleasure. It's clearly a problem we're solving.